it's so good to see you again. And today we're talking about the science of ASMR. So, it's been a couple weeks, and I've sort of been just taking stock of everything that's been going on. And so, I thought this would be a good time to maybe explore some of the benefits of ASMR and also to help, just add to the conversation about what we can do to solidify some of the research out there and to, help get funding and whatnot, because it's definitely in my opinion, it's an art form, and I believe that it will continue to grow and expand, and I think that's definitely an interesting avenue. So today we're going to go over some studies that I've found, about 7 of them or so, and we're going to just read through them and see what kind of research they found. So I think that one of the great places to start is with music, which I think a lot of you can relate to the experience of music frisson, which is that feeling you get when you listen to a really good song. You get goosebumps and you feel the emotion really deeply. It almost makes your skin tingle. That's sort of a similar response biologically as ASMR, so there's been some research to show that there's a link between those two phenomena. So we're going to be starting by as well looking at a study in 2015 and 2018, also 2016. And we're going to read through everything, see what they have to say. I did want to also say I hope that you're all doing okay and during this time. And I know that it's a very difficult period for everybody. So, I'm extremely touched by all the people coming out and just the community here. And I thought that this might be a perfect time to share some of my passion for ASMR, not only as an ASMR artist, but also just on an intellectual level as well. Importantly, the science is still out. So there's been a lot of research, but there's room for a lot more. So I think it's important for you to, for me to tell you how I feel about it, how it's helped me. When I was abroad, working as a reporter, I felt that, it was helping with the connection. I was in some places that were a bit isolated. So, really helped me get through some stressful periods, as I'm sure it has for you. ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and many of you know from other artists about that. I think it was about maybe 2009, maybe somewhere around there, where people started to mention the experience. And it would be really interesting to see in the comments how it's important to you, and how we can focus on the science that kind of shows how beneficial it really is. So I think it's unfair to say that it's some sort of cure-all. And so with the stress we all go through, it has a lot of benefits, not very many negatives, if any at all. So I think different people come at it from different perspectives. For me, I'm was on radio, and I really make music, and I think from that side of it, from a sound perspective, I think there's a lot of interesting feelings that are like kind of like a synesthesia, not sort of like a combination of emotion and sort of that biological response. I think a lot of people come from that perspective. But I do think a lot of other people come to ASMR from other places. So, I think when you're listening to ASMR, for example, it does show that your heart will reduce a percentage, so that you feel less stress. And so I think that's one thing that we need to explore, is kind of this varied world of ASMR. It's not addictive. It really has a positive experience, I think, with most people. Sort of creates a positive, happy response. So, I do think that there is people who use anything as a crutch, but for the most part, you compare it to other things, and it's pretty positive all around. So, I have met people here in this community who are using ASMR to treat, their stress, their anxiety, depression, those type of things. And of course, with other, with therapists and other things like that. Obviously, it's not a cure-all, So, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a therapeutic angle, and also from just an experiential perspective, it is an interesting kind of feeling. So, I think there's that as well. So in April 2019, for example, there were hundreds of YouTubers that collectively posted, for example, just 200 videos a day of ASMR triggers. So you find that many of these artists have really almost a celebrity status, making millions of fans and a lot of money as well. So there is a sort of glitz and glam perspective as well to include in this whole thing. So, from my own personal experience, I find the community to be quite kind-hearted, and I think they're very interested in learning more, the deeper side of ASMR as well. But of course, there's always the controversy in any science or any different art form. So I have to add the reporter side of me that there are some people who are doubters. They might say the experience is not real. The result is of maybe recreational drugs or imagined sensations. Perhaps it's all in your head. So some might say it's an unhealthy behavior in the sense that it is kind of watching somebody else do things without having to interact with real people. There are active members of the community, but I do think that there's criticism to be made there, as there is with YouTube in general or any art form. So I don't find it to be something unique to ASMR, but it's important to add in some of these caveats because I do think that, having a balanced view is very important. So from my perspective, and there's a biological aspect and there's definitely a psychological perspective as well. So, but for my best friend, for example, who does not experience it, for him it seems like it's a made-up thing and he doesn't understand it. So, there are different perspectives, and I think the science so far does support the benefits. So I think that that's really important to say, and that's why it's really important we get more research and try to do more. So for me, it's kind of like just almost a sense of relaxation. I do have I feel like it has a guided meditation aspect. I think for me, that was how it began, was just these guided meditations I found back in the early 2000s, which really was the first time that I had ASMR, and also like researching in the library as well. You would get the sound of the pages and things like that. So for me, it's like, sound of pages turning. It's usually soft-spoken. I do like some whisper, just sort of mixed. And like tea stuff, coffee, kind of just anything that's like a meticulous process. So I really like maps and art and stuff like that. And it's funny because, I'll be at a hotel or something like that, and the check-in, you're like, oh my god, this is ASMR in real life. So that's kind of funny too. So one other caveat I think is important to add here is that it's no replacement for professional mental health professional. Having that training really makes a big difference in the way that you can deal with these things, but I think it is another added bonus and tool to be able to use ASMR as well. So it's important to just say, despite whatever thing you might be going through, ASMR can't be a replacement for therapy and things of that nature. Just because there's a difference between, a trained doctor and somebody who's an amateur on YouTube. But again, it is extremely beneficial and a really powerful tool. And I think that you can't really downplay that side of it either. So that's really important as well. So, but in case people are looking at it for some sort of panacea for all their problems, that of course is something that will always be there, and we have to be strong through that as well. But I do think ASMR makes it a lot easier and gives some of that connection when maybe you may not have it normally. So they found in the prefrontal medial cortex, sort of the evolutionary part of the brain that's associated with self-awareness and social information processing, and also social behaviors as well. So they found that it was activated when listening to ASMR, which is really fascinating. There's also activation in the brain areas associated with reward and emotional arousal as well. So there's some biological thing there. And the researchers speculate that this pattern sort of reflects how ASMR resembles pleasures of social engagement. So, you could compare it to grooming behaviors in other animals. And if you ever watched a video of primates grooming each other, they seem to be enjoying it. And there's an aspect of that, the sound at least, that plays a role, psychologically speaking, in the experience. If you watch the face of a monkey being groomed, you'll know that they're just really enjoying it. I'm sure how many of you have had that experience, but I haven't, so you can sort of see that correlation there. So having a monkey pick those ticks off of you, it's a rewarding behavior, and Pavlovian, reward response. So that's really fascinating, just coming from that biological sort of warm tingles down your back feeling. And it might just play a really biological function, just with social interaction. That might be part of what elicits that response. So there's also imaging that's been done, MRIs that show that, other parts of the brain are activated. Again, there's a lot of varied research about it. So another recent study compared ASMR and non-ASMR people, because the question is, where's the difference? And they did find that people who experience ASMR experience more mindfulness. I think that refers to just being more grounded in the here and the now. So by their own reporting, people who experience ASMR were generally more mindful, curiously mindful in their day-to-day. So that doesn't really mean that you're going to be more mindful necessarily than your friend, but on the average, the study would suggest that there's a correlation between ASMR and just overall level of mindfulness. So people who experience ASMR tend to be more curious and open to new experiences. So obviously that makes sense, since ASMR is fairly unique and relatively new. So maybe also try and eat a strange food, or just eating mindfully, or contentedly hanging out. So one of the first studies, which was done at Swansea University, they interviewed nearly 500 people about their experience of ASMR. And what they found was fairly interesting, and it was really sort of the beginning of the research for this field. And one of the things that they concluded is that ASMR does provide a sense of temporary relief, which supports what we may anecdotally already know. Helps your mood from those suffering from depression and or anxiety. So again, that confirms what many people might have already said, but it's good to have some scientific studies that survive it or support it. So even if people didn't get the tingling sensation, they would still have a sense of relaxation. So the people who experienced ASMR had a decrease on average of 3.14 beats per minute. So that was compared to those who did not. So alone right there, that shows a biological difference. And there's more to explore there, absolutely. There's still work to be done on Frisson. This is the goosebumps that some people get when they listen to music. And there's also studies that show a comparison there as well. So that may be a part of it. So we don't know what proportion of the population actually experiences ASMR, which is another reason we need more research, because sort of the only way a person is going to find it is maybe they read an article in the newspaper, or they went online and found some mukbang or something. If they're not looking for it, they're not going to find it. So, with something that has very little downsides, of course there could be, but it seems unlikely with what we have here. And so, there's a lot more to see. So, one of the other interesting studies found that the brains of people who do experience ASMR are actually different from people who don't. So, by studying the blood flow of within the brain, they were able to just determine, especially by focusing on an area called the default mode network. I'm no expert, but this is what the study says, and essentially that it shows that, by looking at the brain, they can tell that there is less inhibition for people who experience ASMR, and they have less inhibition of emotions. And this was actually 11 participants, so take it as you will, but comparatively they had less inhibition in the sensory and emotional response comparatively, so that's really interesting as well. Now the next study says that ASMR is not the same as getting turned on. So a lot of people do make that mistake. But as we mentioned earlier, the heart rate decreases an average of 3.14. So that said, arousal is the complete opposite. So in 2018, there was another study that found that there are actually two different feelings and phenomena. So they found on average that because of that decrease, it was far different from arousal. So that said, there was a increase in these sort of skin conductance levels. So that sort of tingly feeling, and that's sort of a autonomic nerve system response. But you take that together with the lowered heart rate and the skin conductance, and it's a little bit, so it's sort of a unique experience compared to arousal or something like that. So I think that same sense of euphoria is there in some ways, but yeah, again, it's definitely different. And that's where I think it's comparative to music, in the sense that it is sort of like music-induced chills or awe-inspired chills. So maybe you hear that amazing speech by Martin Luther King, or maybe you see a mountain, beautiful scenery. It's sort of that emotional, aesthetic response that some people experience. And you know what? Other people don't. So, you look at in these studies, and I think you're going to find that, again, a lot more research is needed to really come to more conclusions. So let's go ahead and take a look at these studies, and then we'll see what we can try to understand, and maybe know what areas need to be investigated further. So I look forward to it, and let's go take a look at at these documents and sit at my desk. So we're gonna just go ahead and read these studies one by one, and they're kind of short. I cut out the important parts, and you can get an idea about what kind of research has been done so far. So the first one here, actually I should say the information here, almost all of it is from the National Institute of Health. So these are very esteemed institutions. So these studies are very accurate. So the first one is the autonomous sensory meridian response, a flow-like mental state. And we mentioned this earlier, Barrett, and this was one of the earlier ones. So, autonomous sensory meridian response is a previously unstudied sensory phenomenon in which individuals experience a tingling, static-like sensation across the scalp, back of the neck, and at times further areas in response to specific triggering audio and visual stimuli. This sensation is is widely reported to be accompanied by feelings of relaxation and well-being. The current study identifies several common triggers used to achieve ASMR, including whispering, personal attention, crisp sounds, and slow movements. Data obtained also illustrates temporary improvements in symptoms of depression and chronic pain in those who engage in ASMR. A high prevalence of synesthesia, 5.9%, within the sample suggests a possible link between ASMR and synesthesia, similar to that of misophonia, which is a sound that I think kind of just makes you feel unpleasant. So like snails on a chalkboard. Links between number of effective triggers and heightened flow state suggest that flow may be necessary to achieve sensations associated with ASMR. So essentially, by studying the blood flow within the brain, they're able to measure the activity associated with ASMR feelings. So this is just essentially saying that there is a correlation there. And it's kind of just defining what ASMR is in general. And then in the next page, I, just for making it shorter for this video, there's some images of different neural states, and just from an MRI image. So, and again, that's from E.L. Barrett and N.J. Davis. So let's go ahead and move on to the next study here. Now this is the atypical functional connectivity associated with autonomous sensory meridian response, an examination of 5 resting state networks by S.D. Smith, B.K. Fredborg, and J. Kernelson. And let's go ahead and just read through this one. Again, I kept it short so that we can just read through. Autonomous sensory meridian response, ASMR, is a perceptual phenomena in which a specific auditory and or visual stimuli consistently elicit tingling sensations on the neck, scalp, and shoulders, as well as a positive and relaxed emotional state. The ASMR triggers that initiate these responses generally consist of soft sounds, whispering, repetitive noises. E.g., tapping sounds or videos of people performing socially intimate acts, watching someone brush their hair. Despite being a relatively common phenomenon, little is known about the neural substrates of ASMR. In the current research, resting state functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, was used to examine whether ASMR was associated with atypical patterns of functional connectivity. 17 individuals with ASMR and 17 matched control participants underwent an anatomical MRI scan and a resting state fMRI scan. An independent components analysis was used to identify the default mode, salience, central executive, sensory motor, and visual networks. An analysis of variance with group ASMR versus control as a between subjects variable was performed to contrast the functional connectivity of each of these networks. The results demonstrated that ASMR was associated with a reduced functional connectivity in the salience and visual networks and with atypical patterns of connectivity in the default mode, central executive, and sensory motor networks. So, essentially, this is just showing that there is unique connections between the different parts of the brain in terms of stimulus and connectivity versus, so if, like, for example, people who experience ASMR compared with people who don't. And essentially they're finding that there's a reduced functional connectivity in the salience and visual networks, so that's interesting. And then also within the general default mode and the central executive and sensory motor networks, there was atypical patterns. So this was done in 2019. So this is one of the more recent studies. And it's really showing that there's crossover in the brain that is responsible for activating the ASMR experience. And that perhaps people who experience ASMR, there is something different going on in the brain compared to those who do not experience it. So there may be some crossover. So let's go ahead and move on to the next study. Actually, here's some different images of the brain. Now we can't really, like, these are black and white, and so they don't really, I printed this out to make paper sounds for ASMR, so coloring wasn't that important, but just to show that, when they do this fMRI, there are different parts of the brain activated as opposed to those who do not experience it, and when there's no ASMR being played as well. So there we go. Move on to the next study. So the next study is mindfulness and autonomous sensory meridian response, ASMR, by B.K. Fredborg, J.M. Clark, and S.D. Smith. And this was in August 7th, 2018. So this was relatively recent, not as recent as the last study, but there's only been a handful of studies done on ASMR, so this is one of the more recent ones comparatively. So let's go ahead and read this one here. Autonomous sensory meridian response, ASMR, is a perceptual phenomena in which specific audiovisual stimuli frequently elicit tingling sensations on the scalp and neck. These stimuli, or ASMR triggers, are basically social in nature. For example, watching someone brush their hair, hearing whispering, and often elicit a calm and positive emotional state that may last up to several minutes. ASMR experiences phenomenological overlap with mindfulness. However, no research has directly examined how mindfulness might relate to ASMR. In the current study, 284 individuals with ASMR completed the Toronto Mindfulness Scale, the Mindfulness Attention and Awareness Scale, and a questionnaire examining ASMR experiences. So these are just psychological tests to gauge mindfulness and awareness. Age and sex matched control participants were asked to view 2 ASMR eliciting videos to ensure that they did not experience tingling sensations associated with ASMR. And they then completed the TMS and MAS questionnaires. So that's these skills here. When compared with matched controls, individuals with ASMR generated significantly higher scores on the MAS, a global measure of mindfulness, as well as significantly higher scores on the curiosity subscale of the TMS. So the conclusions essentially for this show, these results suggest that the sensory emotional experiences associated with ASMR may be partially explained by a distinct subset of characteristics associated with mindfulness. So again, in my own words, I would say this is a study that's showing that there is a correlation with mindfulness and people who experience ASMR, as well as curiosity as well. I haven't read these scales, so I have to read what they define as curiosity or mindfulness, but I'm assuming that it's a legitimate study, and so I'm coming with some assumptions about what those terms mean, but for the purpose of this video, we're just gonna read the papers and then move forward. So let's move on to the next one. A functional magnetic resonance imaging investigation of the autonomous sensory meridian response. And this is from June 2019. And the authors again are Smith, S.D. Smith, B.K. Fredborg, and J. Cornelson. So it's kind of very similar researchers that seem to be specifically studying this here. So background. Autonomous sensory meridian response is a sensory emotional experience in which specific stimuli trigger tingling sensations on the scalp, neck, and shoulders. These sensations are accompanied by a positive affective state. In the current research, functional magnetic resonance imaging was used in order to delineate the neural substrate of these responses. Methods. A total of 17 individuals with ASMR and 17 age and sex-matched control participants underwent fMRI scanning while watching 6 4-minute videos. 3 of the videos were designed to elicit ASMR tingling, and 3 videos were not. And the results essentially show that ASMR videos have a distinct effect on the neural activity of individuals who are getting the ASMR. The contrast of ASMR participants' responses to ASMR videos showed greater activity in the cingulate gyrus. Unfortunately, I don't know what part of the brain that is, as well as in cortical regions related to audition, movement, and vision. This activity was not observed in control participants. The contrast of ASMR and control participants' responses to ASMR eliciting videos detected greater activity in right cingulate gyrus, right paracentral lobule, and the bilateral thalamus in ASMR participants. Control participants showed greater activity in the lingula and culmen of the cerebellum. So together, these results highlight the fact that ASMR videos elicit activity in brain areas related to sensation, emotion, and attention in individuals with ASMR, but not in matched control participants. So this is just showing that there is activity in the brain that's different from the control participants for people who experience ASMR. And essentially, these are the areas where this is taking place. So let's move on. So that's where it's taking place. So there's so much else to do here. Two of the studies, unfortunately, my printer messed up, and as it is sort of not a great scenario for getting new printer ink, I just mentioned them in the previous section here, but for now this will have to do. But those parts essentially just show that there is crossover and synesthesia within the brain. So these next two studies I'm going to just go ahead and link in the section below. So if you are curious to read more, there's more information. And of course, there's a lot of other people out there trying to do as much research as possible, because I think that it's going to find that it's a very positive thing, and it can provide a lot of relief in terms of anxiety and things like that, just with regards to like a meditation or something of that nature. So that all said, I look forward to more studies coming out. So in conclusion, I think that we really need to learn a lot more, and we need more hard science to really hammer down on the data. And I think it'll be really interesting to see where ASMR, how it moves forward. Perhaps you can combine it. I know there's the binaural beats and things of that nature. You combine that with nature scenery, and I think ASMR has a very bright future. So go investigate yourself. Go online, go on Google, National Institute of Health. Check out other amazing ASMR artists. There's so many great ones here in the community. And, if you have any friends who are researching, talk about this experience. It's definitely something unique. And again, I think with more funding and more, the more the mainstream understands what this experience is, I think we're going to have a lot deeper understanding of this art and the science and kind of this phenomenon in general. So I invite you to look on your own, and again, to come to your own conclusions about it. But I really hope you have a really lovely time, and that you're getting through this. Again, I know it's a very difficult time, and so I want you to be as safe as you can, and I look forward to bringing out some more videos during this time. I had a sort of a room here, and I was just building a sort of a better studio so I can bring more content. I know I've said that a lot, but things should be a little more normalized at this point. So anyway, have yourself a good night, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.